Welcome to another episode of Press Play, Media Strategies from Scott Media Tulsa. I'm your host, Jeremy Scott, and today we're talking about one of the most critical topics in public relations and media strategy, crisis communications. So whether you're a small business, a nonprofit, or even a global brand, a crisis can really strike at any moment. What matters is how you respond and manage the situation to protect both your reputation and maintain trust. So in today's episode, we're going to explore why having a crisis communications plan is essential, how to work with the media during a crisis, and some of the best practices that can help you handle the storm. Plus, I'll share a couple of real-world examples of how I handled crisis communications in my roles both in media and on the media relations side. We'll talk about all that and more in this episode of Press Play. Well, I'm excited to talk about this topic today. Last week, I was invited by the Tulsa chapter of the American Marketing Association to come to one of their luncheons to speak about crisis communications. So it brought up a great conversation and it kind of inspired me to do this episode. We spoke a little bit about what a crisis communications plan is, what types of crises you might face as a business owner, a nonprofit leader, or anyone with a personal brand or anything that you value and want to protect. And then we spoke a little bit about my perspective working in both journalism as a journalist and then also as a media relations person on kind of the more PR side, what a crisis communications plan looks like from both of those perspectives and how each side can work together, some best practices to make sure that you are getting the message out in the way that you want, that you can help control the narrative, and that also gets the media, social media, your clients and your stakeholders all what they want. So that's kind of where this episode came from. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So the first question is, what is crisis communications? So crisis communications really, by definition, is the strategic management of information and messaging during a crisis that affects a company or individual's reputation. So it involves crafting and delivering timely, clear, and accurate responses to help mitigate damage and protect your brand reputation. So why is that important? So in this day and age, bad news can travel very quickly. So a poorly handled crisis can really have long-term negative effects on the perception of your brand. So as media relations professionals or PR folks, even in marketing, we all play a crucial role in ensuring that the brand's voice remains consistent, empathetic, and strategic during a crisis. And there can be all kinds of different crisis situations. So everything from emergencies, which would be like a shooting on your property, a fire, a flood, any number of other things, a social media blunder. You know, we've all had leadership or even employees who post something on social media that they shouldn't. It gets picked up by the media or by others on social media and spirals out of control. So certainly that can be a crisis. If you are a company that serves customers, a customer service issue can certainly spiral out of control. A product recall, cybersecurity is one that we've seen a lot lately. How many companies do you know of that have had cybersecurity incidents? We've seen hospital systems get taken down by cybersecurity. Television stations have been taken off the air because of cybersecurity. So certainly any of those can be a crisis situation. With the recent hurricanes we've had, a natural disaster, a fire, wildfires, a flood, a tornado, any of those could certainly be a crisis. And then these days, rumors can certainly get out of control. And we see that a lot, especially during an election season. A lot of people share things on social media without verifying the facts, and rumors can quickly get out of control. And it's your job as a media relations person to address that crisis and have a plan to get the record corrected and make sure everyone has the facts to mitigate that rumor. So before you even get to that crisis, it's important to have a crisis communications plan in place. So the first thing you have to do is identify your crisis response team. So really it's a small group of decision makers in your organization who will help guide your organization through a crisis. So it should include someone certainly from a senior leadership role, in addition to people from your communications team, probably a communications lead. It's also a good idea to have someone from legal counsel on that communications team, crisis team as well. It's important to make sure everyone knows their roles. So who is speaking to the media when a crisis happens, who is addressing concerns with employees or stakeholders. If you have a legal counsel or someone in that role, their role is pretty defined, but it's important to make sure that your plan is clear, who has what role and what are their responsibilities. That's something I see a lot is organizations get hit out of the blue with a crisis and they don't have a plan in place. You can clearly tell that from a public's perception or from a media's perception. Just making sure that you always have your ducks in a row before a crisis hits can really make or break your response and the perception of your brand. So now that you have your plan in place, you have all your team members with their assigned roles, then the media calls. So how do you handle the media when a crisis strikes? So it really can be daunting, but it's one of the most important elements of crisis management. So journalists are going to report on your crisis, whether you engage with them or not. So how do you work with them? How do you help control the narrative and make sure that things don't spiral out of control? So there are 3 key tips that I would provide. Number 1, be transparent and honest. So the worst thing that you can do during a crisis is to stop answering media calls or even give them half truths. Incomplete information is okay as long as you are upfront about that. Nobody knows everything at the beginning of a crisis, so be transparent and honest with the media about that. If you don't have all the information, it's okay to say we're still gathering those facts. We are working on getting a statement prepared. We will give you an update as soon as we get it. But I mean, it's really important. Don't hide or distort the truth because the media and the public will find out eventually, and that'll come back to haunt you in the future. The second tip is have a designated spokesperson. So that person should be media trained and be able to handle tough questions and questions that come very quickly. So ideally, your spokesperson is going to be someone either from senior leadership or your communications team who can convey authority and answer questions in a timely manner. It's also okay to let media know that you all are busy right now and you can't answer questions, but that you're working on it, and tell media when you'll make someone available. It doesn't have to be a full press conference, although that's nice too, but just communicating that and saying, yes, we're aware that we have this media request. We are working on a statement. We're working on information. We are working on providing interviews, and we will get those to you by your deadline. I think a lot of times I've worked with organizations who assume that if you don't answer the media's calls or if you keep kind of kicking the can down the road, that the media will just wait to report the story. Of course, that's not the case. The 5 o'clock news is at 5 o'clock every single day, and they're going to go on the air about your crisis, whether you have a statement for them or not. So as a media relations, a PR person, anyone in senior leadership, it's your job to make sure that you get that quickly. Again, if you've done your work ahead of time and you have a crisis communications plan already in place that includes statements for the media, you can just go in and update it and get that out pretty quickly. The third tip would be prepare for some pretty tough questions. So journalists are likely going to ask difficult questions, especially in a crisis situation. So it's really important to anticipate what those questions will be and have some of those answers prepared. Again, as part of your crisis communications preparation, you should have gone through some mock interviews with your media folks. They can help prepare you for those questions. If not, I would really recommend hiring someone to help with media training, and part of that training could be crisis communications. It's something that I do through my agency. It should be a very standard part of your crisis communications prep plan. It really shows that you're not going to get caught off guard and that you're taking the situation seriously. So let's talk some overall best practices for crisis communication. So there are a few easy principles that can guide you almost through any crisis. Act quickly, but thoughtfully. So speed really is crucial, but you can't rush so much that you make mistakes. A well-coordinated response within the first hour of a crisis can help you control the narrative and prevent misinformation from spreading. Again, as I mentioned, in this day and age with social media, misinformation can very quickly spread and get out of control. So making sure that you have a well-coordinated response, a plan in place is really going to help prevent that from happening. Show empathy. People remember how you made them feel during a crisis. So if your company is responsible for causing harm, acknowledge that and apologize. Empathy really goes a long way toward rebuilding trust. I would recommend in that situation, the media spokesperson be someone in senior leadership, the owner of your company, a CEO, someone who can be the face of empathy and sincerity, not someone who is shying away from the problem and trying to make it look like you're sweeping things under the rug. Stay consistent. So make sure all your communications, whether it's a news release, a social media post, or even an internal memo, everything sends the same message. Conflicting messages, I see that all the time, where one person will say something, the girl at the front desk says something else, someone at the senior leadership is talking to their friend who's a reporter saying something else. Conflicting messages will only add confusion and hurt your credibility. And there's nothing more damaging than having multiple media outlets covering the same crisis in different ways. It seems like you all are not on the same page because you're not on the same page. And then I would also say use social media wisely. So social media really can be a double-edged sword when it comes to a crisis. On one hand, it can allow you to communicate directly with the public in real time. On the other hand, a misstep on social media can go viral pretty quickly. So make sure your social media team is briefed and follows all the same guidelines as your PR team. So during my recent luncheon at the American Marketing Association, I shared a couple crisis comms case studies, which I'll share here as well. During my luncheon, I was able to get more in depth and name names. On this podcast, I won't be able to do that because it's so public. I want to protect identities for folks. But one of the case studies I shared had to do with an emergency crisis. So it was one of those that I mentioned that could be, something serious, an emergency response on your property. And so for one of those, I had a shots fired call when I was working in crisis comms. And so just to share that story, I received a phone call at 2:30 in the morning from the media and actually heard about what had happened from a reporter in Tulsa. So I picked up the phone. As a media relations person, you should be on call 24/7. That's your job. And so you should make sure that your phone is on. So I answered the phone and they said, hey, we've heard this incident has happened. Do you have any information? Of course, in that situation, I hadn't. I literally had just been woken up by the phone call. So I immediately started waking up people on my team. Again, we had a crisis communications plan in place that included calling a number of people in different departments, including security. So we spoke with security at the location. I spoke with other people on my team, and regardless of the time, it was 2:30 in the morning, we were getting up. I was also told by the media team that called me that they were sending a crew, so I knew that I would have media arriving probably before I did, because again, I'm in bed, so I need to get up and at least get dressed and out the door. They're already on the way, so of course they're going to get there first. So one of the first things I did was speak with security about setting up a media staging area. So that's really important in any crisis communication situation. It's important to let the media know where they can go that's not going to be in anyone's way. So in this case, we had local police on scene. They were leading the charge, and we wanted to make sure that media was kept away. Where I was able to meet up with the reporters and kind of brief them through what I knew, which in that case wasn't a lot. And then while they were going live, so it was during a newscast, they were live on the air talking about what was happening. While they were doing that, I was working with our internal comms teams to get more information that I could then, relay. But we also had the same, I mentioned before, making sure that you have someone designated to brief the people who work in your organization. So it's really important during a crisis that the people who work for you, your employees, your staff, any board members, stakeholders, that they hear about the crisis from you before the media. Now, you can't always make that promise. When things happen really fast, and depending on the time of day, media may break a story before you have a chance to tell anyone. But for me, that was always really important. I didn't want anyone in the organization to find out things on the news. I wanted them to hear it from our team, because it's important to help mitigate an emotional response that would cause someone from the team or from our group to call the media and say, they haven't told us anything, I don't know what's going on. Then the media is going to report that. It looks like chaos. So as long as a memo goes out, something is ready that says there's something happening, we have our team on standby, we are addressing the situation, it will help mitigate that. I find that employees and staff and all them just want to be told that something's going on and that people are aware of it, and it will help you in the long run. It turned out that what the original story was called out as was not the case, and so that one was able to wrap up pretty quickly. We were able to get clarification from the local police, brief the media on what truly happened, which wasn't at all what they thought it was, and the media left pretty shortly after that. The next story, it really reinforces the reason I say, as a media relations person, that you need to be available 24 hours a day. This story, for me, is one of those that I always remember. I get very emotional when I talk about it. The people who are there with the luncheon will tell you I almost started crying when I was talking. I won't do that on here, but it's important to be available all the time, because you never know when someone's life could be at risk. And so when I was working in news years ago, I received a phone call from a viewer who was asking us if we had heard about a missing child, that there was a missing child and some community members were getting together and trying to find this kid. And did we know anything about it? It was probably 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. Both of these stories were early in the morning. And I said, no, I hadn't heard anything. And they said, well, we've been trying to get a hold of the police, but they won't tell us anything. Since you guys are in news, can you get some information? And I said, well, I'll give them a call. We don't have any special privileges that you don't have, but, sometimes if the police know that the media is on the case, they'll give us some information. And so I called and I heard the phrase that is my least favorite thing to hear, which is call back during business hours. In the days of a 24-hour news cycle, business hours for someone are all the time. And so if you are working in PR, if you are working in media relations, if you are a spokesperson, it is your job to be available 24 hours a day. I get that you have traditional business hours, but when a crisis strikes, you have to be able to respond because someone somewhere is working. And so I tried to get that through to this woman, and she refused to pass along a message and said, call back after 8. And so I waited. I called the lady back that called the viewer, and I said, hey, I just wanted to update you. They're not giving us any information. I have nothing to release. And when we go on the air at 4:30, I have nothing to report that says a child is missing. So I called back after business hours at 8 o'clock. It probably took another hour or so before the PIO called me back, and they informed me that the child had been found dead in a pond a short time before 8 o'clock. And I have no way of ever knowing if when I called at 3 o'clock in the morning, if that child was already in the pond or if the child was missing and wandering around. And I always just think if the child was alive at that time, if someone had been looking for that child, if we had gone on television for the morning show and said, there's a missing child, please be on the lookout, would someone have found that child before the child went into the pond? Again, I have no way to ever know that, but that's something that has always stuck with me. It's possible that we could have saved that child's life, and it all came down to a lack of availability for someone at that police department who didn't want to answer any calls overnight. It just reinforces to me always, if you are in a media relations role, you have to be available 24 hours a day. And if you can't be available for whatever reason, you need to designate someone to be available 24 hours a day. There's got to be someone available to take calls because someone's life could depend on it. So what are some key takeaways from this episode? So number one, always have a crisis communications plan in place. You never know when a crisis is going to strike, and it's going to be the one time you're not ready for it. Make sure you are prepared. Number two, be proactive and honest with the media. Don't let someone else control the narrative. They're going to go with what they have. And if you can provide information to them, journalists are great people. Journalists cover the communities where they live. They are serious about their job. They care about their job. They care about their community. They're not going to go out of their way to make your situation worse unless you refuse to answer their questions or give them misinformation. They're going to remember that. And the third takeaway, I would say your response time and transparency really is going to dictate how your brand emerges from a crisis. Sometimes people remember how you dealt with a crisis more than a crisis itself. So just take that into account as well. So all this information is in a new ebook that I have through my Scott Media Tulsa digital bookstore. The book is called Crisis Management: How Small Businesses Can Handle Negative Publicity. But really, it's not just for small businesses. I mean, it could be for nonprofits. It could be for people who have a brand, a store. If you're an influencer, anybody who might have a brand that you want to protect. There's tons of more information in there. I also have several templates that can help you with things like social media responses, internal memos, help you form a crisis communications plan, including roles and responsibilities. All that's available on my website, scottmediatulsa.com. That's Scott with one T, SCOT, mediatulsa.com. Just click on the digital bookstore at the top and it'll take you straight there. Well, that'll do it for today's episode of Press Play. I hope you found it insightful and you're able to apply some of this to your media strategies and your own work. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an update. And if you're looking for more tips and tricks, tools, resources on media relations or crisis communications, I have an entire blog on my website. You can certainly check out that as well. It's all free. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. So you can connect with me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. drop a comment or review or send me a message. That'll certainly really help me out. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.